My friend Chris once said that Pathfinder 2nd Edition makes its players into game designers. Let's find out how true that sentiment is. Hey everyone, Utkarsh from Spirit Bell Games here. Today I am once again talking about action design, and I think I'm getting a little tired of it, so I'm glad that next week and the week after, when we continue this topic to other aspects of Pathfinder 2e design, I'll be covering aspects of design that we haven't yet talked about. But for today, let's try and put a cap on the discussion of action design in Pathfinder 2nd Edition that we've had so far. So originally I talked about all of the pros of the 3-action turn, and then I also had a video talking about how spellcasters interact with the 3-action turn and how in some ways that's misunderstood, but in some ways that's well understood and the critiques are accurate. In this video, I want to talk about how the player becomes a co-designer by selecting their class and archetype and skill action options. This may sound pretty intuitive if Pathfinder 2nd Edition is your main game, but if you know how other games design their action turns and action economies, you may have seen that this co-designing aspect is less present in other games. If we take games like D&D 4th Edition or Draw Steel, then we see that the action breakup is more done by the designers rather than by the players. Most of what you will be doing that is very impactful falls into the one main action, and then movement is a freebie that's given, and then it's only your minor action where you decide whether you're coming in with your in-class minor action or something externally that you've brought in. But that is not so in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. We know from a very basic perspective that there's a difference in martial action design and caster action design. And it feels like that is all of it, that martials get single action flexibility and casters get this double action requirement where all of their spells and cantrips, or most of them at least, require 2 actions to cast. So one side is flexible, the other side is inflexible. End of story? Well, not quite. After you're done watching this video today, I hope you realize how much flexibility and inflexibility and just customizability there is in both martial side and the caster side, so that you have the option to make a game of your choosing, even just as a player. But we'll also discuss at the end what are the cons of this kind of system. So let us get started. Oh, and then in the Patreon Extended Edition, once I'm done discussing all the broad design, the Extended Edition, I also go class by class, following a spreadsheet to show where I think this design customizability breaks down, how it breaks down with class selection. Right, so in a naive perspective, we have a separation of 2 possible action turns, right? There's the flexible single action where the martials are making their strikes and they have the choice to do like 2 action move, 1 action strike, 1 action move, 2 strike actions, and so on, whereas the casters don't have this flexibility where they have these 2 coupled actions, which is the cast a spell, 2 action spell, and the choice they get to make is what spell they get to cast and then what they want to do with that 3rd action. So that is what it looks like on the surface. But in reality, there are many more different breakdowns you can have, and to simplify it, I have made 6 categories. The first one is the single flexible action, and the examples that I have for this are Barbarian, because Barbarians primarily have a lot of their class features applied to their single strikes, and they don't get a ton of feats that create multi-action activities. And now with the remaster, their rage is also a free action at the start of the combat. So Barbarians truly showcase that flexibility. But also on the other side, on the caster side, I want to bring up the Animist. The flexibility of vessel spells in their 1 action cost and the ability to be a good 1 action damage dealing spell. Of course, I'm talking about Earth Bile here, but also good 1 action healing like with Garden of Healing. This is why Threbenyu has such a fondness for Animist, and it is very well deserved, because the Animist can be played with all single actions and they work out just fine. They can have sustaining an Earth Bile with a step, with a feat that they get later on, plus they can bring in their other apparition and then start casting its one action vessel spells, so they can be juggling one action vessel spells while stepping or moving or raising their shield. And so they get a very solid combo of single action flexibility without necessarily needing to use their double action spells, which they also have the option to fall back on. So this is the first one, which is true single action flexibility. The second one is the setup and sustain of single actions. So this is where I would put rangers on the martial side and thaumaturges as well, where they need this one action extra setup plus then the one action to make a strike. And then in subsequent turns, the one action setup with hunt prey or exploit vulnerability can continue if their prey is still standing. If not, then they need to do the setup again and then continue with the one action follow-ups. On the caster side, all occult casters get access to spiritual armament, which falls in this same sustain plus single action continuous activity. And so we can see that there's a mechanical differentiation between how casters use the setup and sustain and the martials use the setup and strike, but the action design in terms of action expenditure does turn out to be following a similar pattern. So again, I could have broken these down into individual ones, but they're similar enough that let's categorize them in the second option, which is the setup plus single. Following this, we have the double uncoupled action, and this tends to come up with martials more than casters. Specifically, it is anyone wielding a reload weapon and alchemists, non-bomber, especially alchemists, that need to spend one action to either draw a vial or to do quick alchemy. Both of these two categories, they require an uncoupled action, but the action is mandatory for them to continue doing their thing or to set up their thing. So every time a gunslinger with an arbalest wants to take a shot, they need to have reloaded the weapon. And the same thing applies to the non-bomber alchemist. But unlike the next one we'll see, which is the double coupled, in the double uncoupled, at least there is the option to decide when you want to do that reload action. You can split it across different turns. You can interweave it with other actions. And especially for reload, you can also get feats that makes reload better by letting you do other actions on top of just the reload. So the upshot of it is that within 2 turns, you can technically fire 3 shots, whereas in the double coupled case, which is where cantrips and 2-action spells come in, you cannot cast 3 2-action spells within 2 turns, ignoring the level 10 quickened spell feat. So in this fourth category, the double coupled actions, this is where we tend to see casters living, which is true. A lot of casters that rely on cantrips and slotted spells tend to use 2-action spells. But this is also where a lot of the fighters that I build tend to live. Yes, you can have fighters that rely on just the press trait, which puts them into the first category of single flexible actions. But I tend to build a lot of 2-handed weapon wielding, either reach fighters or just pure damage fighters. And these come with many possible 2-action activities, which really enhance how the fighter plays. Oh, or also the double slice fighter, right? Classic 2-action activity, wielding 1 weapon in each hand and relying on this coupled 2-action option. Now on the fighter side, they have the advantage that if they need to, they could still be flexible. They could still, move, seek, and then make a strike. So that is the pro on their side. But the con on their side is that if they're standing next to the enemy and they've used their 2 actions to make double slice, then their 3rd action option is a bit limited unless they go outside of class to get some skills, because the option that's available to them is just making a 3rd strike with -10 or maybe -8 multiple attack penalty, which is not the best option. On the other hand, with the casters, they don't have a strong flexibility unless they want to use a focus spell. They can get some flexibility from 1-action cantrips like guidance or shield, but it's not as strong perhaps as the fighter's 1-action strike. But on the other hand, on the caster side, after they've done a 2-action activity like, let's say, fireball, their 3rd action, if they use a spell or a cantrip or focus spell in it, is usually not reduced in effectiveness because casters have a lot of non-multiple attack penalty options. Okay, so far we've covered 4 categories: the single flexible, the setup plus follow-up singles, the double uncoupled, double coupled, and now the 5th one, which is the triple uncoupled. And this is where the Magus lives, where effectively their action design is a 3-action design, but that 3rd action is just enough uncoupled from the first 2 that it gives the Magus flexibility on when and how they want to use it, which is the recharge. And they get conflict spells to, just like with the reload for Gunslinger, to try and overcharge that recharge action with another effective activity piggybacking on top of it. So the Magus uses 2 actions to either cast a spell or make a spell strike, and then 1 action after casting a spell to do, what is it called? Oh, I know this. The arcane boost that they get. Oh, Cascade, yes. Arcane Cascade. So they can do like a 2-action buff, like casting Runic Weapon, followed by a 1-action Arcane Cascade. So that becomes their uncoupled 3-action. Or they can do a 2-action Spell Strike, followed by a 1-action recharge. Or they can do move, 2-action Spell Strike, and then on the next turn, they can use a conflict spell to do a recharge plus some other effective action, which allows them to do another spell strike on the turn that follows. So it's effectively like a 3-action turn, but because of that flexibility, there are many different variances possible in a single turn. That's sort of on the martial side. The Magus gets this 3-action uncoupled. And on the caster side, this is where spell shapes live. Whether it's your widen spell or reach spell or all of the other spell shapes that casters get, they are in the triple uncoupled, or they're in the triple uncoupled variety because you have the flexibility of using or not using the spell shape. That's the second last tier. And the last tier I have you guessed triple coupled? Because you are right, mostly. The last tier is triple plus, which is triple coupled. So reliance on these 3-action activities, but also classes that have the option to go beyond 3-action activities. So the triple would be the Eldritch Archer, a gunslinger with spell woven shot. On the martial side, these are again kind of ranged gish, really, where they need 3 actions to make 1 shot, which can hit the enemy and also apply a spell effect. And on the caster side, you can have 3 actions to get a wall up. It's rare to have a caster that fully relies on 3-action spells, but because wall spells in Pathfinder 2nd Edition do not require concentration, you could, if you wanted to, if you were sufficiently high level, keep using 3-action spells to keep creating terrain like Mud Pit at rank 1 or Wall of Stone at rank 5. And I hope you have noticed that with the exception of double uncoupled, every tier has options for martials and for casters. So it's not as simple as just saying that martials have action flexibility, casters do not. All of them can be designed in different ways to be differently flexible and inflexible. Okay, we've discussed the breakdown. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of doing design this way. So let's start with the cons first, because the biggest con, of course, is that it makes onboarding new players more challenging, right? If someone comes in from a different game and they assume that the biggest divide, if any, is going to be between the martials and the casters, then they may feel pigeonholed. Like, oh, if I pick a caster, does that mean I have to pick a class that is inflexible in its actions, that can only do like 2 action plus 1 other action? And at first it may seem that way until you realize that there are vessel spells, there are bard cantrips, composition cantrips, there are hexes. You have other options available, especially if you're willing to intermingle a strike in between these 1-action spell options. And then on the martial side, you may think that you get complete action flexibility, but if you pick a double slice fighter, you may then find yourself being surprised that this high damage build is relying on an inflexible 2-action activity. So it is challenging for newcomers. It's also challenging for when we do design evaluation. When we do comparisons and when we talk about broad complaints, having this kind of options for different playstyles makes things more challenging, because complaints are usually painted in broad strokes, but the experience of the game comes down to not just class selection, but also spell selection, cantrip selection, feat selection. All of these are the different bricks that make you design, like build your own game design within Pathfinder 2nd Edition as a player. And now I've said that, yes, you can have variants on the martial side and the caster side, but there is some amount of mechanical identity that martials and casters do get. For example, when I talked about how they do the setup plus follow-up single actions differently for martials versus casters. So on the martial side, you get something like hunt prey, where you need to be doing that on a per target basis. And then on the caster side, you set it up once and then you can just sustain it every round, but you do need to do that sustain. And so if you want that flipped, if you want to do like a per creature spell targeting where you're zapping someone constantly, kind of like Witch Bolt from 5th edition, that option is not available to you because, again, there's this thematic mechanical identity, coherence. So those are some of the bigger cons, that it's harder to learn that all of this is going on. It's harder to evaluate it and make broad strokes complaints about broadly, martials versus broadly casters. It's also that there is some amount of thematic mechanical coherence, which means that there are fewer single action options for casters and fewer triple action options for martials. Doesn't mean they don't exist, but you need to know that they exist and build for it. But on the plus side, this leads to a lot of variety. It keeps the game fresh, even when you as a player are maybe on your 3rd, 4th, 5th adventure path. By mixing your playstyle and changing it up, you can find different ways to play that makes the game feel like a different game. This pro, it's actually not as strong when we think about action design. In the future videos, we will be talking about turn consistency and resources, attrition. And when you combine actions, turn consistency, and attrition, and figure out how to do your character design in a way that you are doing a specific kind of game design, that's when all of these concepts will come together and make you feel like you are playing a different game by playing a different character build. So that is how you do action design on the player side for the class or the character that you are playing. And as alluded to earlier, next week we will talk about turn consistency, which is how you can avoid having a null turn in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And then after that, we will talk about attrition and resources, how to design your character in a way that aligns with your desire for resource expenditure. In the Patreon Extended Edition, join me to see the per class breakdown of how these action strategies work for each class and where there are caveats and different options for different classes. And join me next week for the discussion on turn consistency. For now, this is me signing off, wishing you all engaging games.